G'day enthusiasts. Today we're back on the HG ute again and we've got the top frame pretty much sorted, so we'll work our way through. We had to do some repairs in here where the sandblaster knocked some holes through it, and we had to put the new piece in the corner here that we prepared for it, and in doing that we had a bit of a stuff up. This wasn't quite on the right angle when it was welded together, and we wound up with this piece pointing towards the floor instead of the other side of the car, and a couple of attempts to sort it out, but we got it done in the end. So sit back and enjoy, and we'll get on with the show. I've hopped in and got this repair all ground down now, and it's looking pretty good. You got little pinholes and things in here. They're not actually holes as such, they're just sort of depressions next to the weld to the metal. There's the odd little rust pit, but none of them are going to cause any issues for us. So there's no holes all the way through the panel. If we get a torch and shine from behind, it's just metal all the way through. So there's nothing like that to worry about. So that is structural. It's back to being as strong as what it was when the car was originally built. And we've hopped in and welded the pieces down that the guy on the assembly line forgot to do. On top of that, I've got into this corner here. I've got our new replacement piece for the inside clamped in position, and I'm really happy with where it's sitting. So that's come back to being pretty much where Holden had put the original piece that we cut away, and I'm going to start preparing to weld that in. So I'm going to plug weld across the front here, so I'll drill a few holes through that. Same again, my 5/16 or 8mm drill bit, and I'll drill completely through the top layer of metal and into the bottom piece, and that'll not only clean the paint off and give us a nice clean surface to weld from, but it'll actually give a little divot in there for the weld to actually burn into the bottom piece of metal before it actually starts joining itself to the top one. I've got this all clamped in place. It needs a few more clamps. I'm going to have to clamp this corner up here, but what I want to do initially when I start welding it is to actually get it to stabilise in the car. So there's a factory weld that runs along here. I can put that one in, and that'll join this edge to this panel here, and that won't move at all. But before that, I'm going to just spot this pillar. Now, I mentioned when we were taking it apart and getting it ready to blast that because they came from two different cars, and being a different models, being a sedan to a ute, it's a different set of tooling that was used. So we've got a little bit of a ledge here where this top one doesn't quite line up with the bottom one. So if I weld this back corner and the front corner in there, now that I've got them perfectly lined up, that will stabilise this piece in the car. It can't move anywhere. And I can start to work that with my plenishing hammer and just bring that in slowly so that it lines up perfectly with the bottom panel. And then I'll get a really nice full weld all the way across this edge in here. And then when I grind it, we'll have a no-fill weld, and it's right where you want to look. I've got to get it nice, but I'm not big on putting fillers on the insides of things like this. It's not necessary. Get them lined up, take the time to get it right, and once you grind it, it'll just disappear into the metal and it'll all be good. So we'll get in a couple more clamps on it, drill those holes, spot these, and then we'll start working around the top. Now, you'll also notice we've got a little bit of a mismatch in here, and that's because we've been in there with the chisel and we've opened that up, so they're not quite sitting perfectly flat. But once we get it stabilised, welds in all the corners so it can't move, I can get a hammer and dolly and just bring these two edges together, and then when we put our plug welds in there, it's going to make a perfect join. Good stuff. I've got these 4 holes here where the original spot welds were. So all I've done is just drilled through the tops of those, and I'm going to weld them back together now, and that'll put the joins back in the same spacings the factory had exactly. Need to really clamp both sides of your weld, but where we're working up to a piece that hasn't been taken apart, we'll just put the one clamp on it and get that weld in there, and then I'll work my way around. Now I've got 3 layers of metal to bite through here, so just making sure I'm in deep enough on that one to get down to where I want the weld to actually join the piece on with. But we've got him. I've drilled through the top 2 layers and we're going to weld onto the bottom one. This all comes down to what I keep saying all the time. The car must be at least as strong as what it was when it left the factory. So we've taken this apart, we're welding it back together, and imagine if this car's in a rollover and it impacts right on this top corner, and all of a sudden what we've been playing with here just splits open. So in an accident situation, this car's going to rely on every square inch of metal on its body to protect the occupants. So if we've got a weld that wants to split, the windscreen will break and come out, all sorts of stupid things like that can happen. So always, always be aware of that. This is structural stuff, people. This is the solid frame of the car we're working on. Got to get it right first time. Lovely weld. Well, that's got it glued from the top, so I'm going to get back inside the car, and I've got this bottom seam where the pinch weld would actually hook on, and I can start working my way around that edge. So I've got all my welds in place around this edge here. I can see from the back of them that they've welded through into the base piece of material, so I've drilled through far enough to do that. I've had enough heat in my weld that I've got a good solid weld through all the metal, and I can tell that by the little dimple of weld that's come through on the back. So that's all good, that's ready to grind off. I've got a couple more little spots on the outside here to plug from the other side where they were drilled previously from the other section. So I can tidy those up, and then we'll get into working this join through here and welding that together. And that's the fun bit for me, because this is also basic. I have done tens, if not hundreds of thousands of these plug welds, so that's all basic stuff. But when you get something like this where there's a pillar that doesn't quite fit, it's actually quite fun to actually work them and work out where you can put a little bit of weld to stabilise a corner, and then work the metal around it and get it all to sit nice and flat. And then when you've got it welded, grind it all off and it all just disappears, and nobody knows you've actually been there. And let's face it, the best repair you can do on any car is the one that nobody knows about, because they just can't pick it, they can't find it. I'm going to get into doing this join now, and for most of it I'll be working inside the car, but this top edge here, the new piece is a little bit further forward than what the original is. So I'm just going to get my hammer in there and use the flat end of it, and I'll just get into the corner, and what I'll do is just hit it with another hammer. Now when you go to trade school or technical college, the first thing they're going to tell you is never hit hammers on each other because they tend to chip and pieces fly off. So if you are doing this, I do recommend eye protection because pieces can come off. It's pretty rare, but it's just one of those things. People have been hurt by it, injured, blinded even probably. So they do give you that warning, so I will pass that on to you. But we're not hitting it hard, and we're hitting it flat on the flat of the hammer. Now I've just upset myself because I've gone a whisker too far. So I'll just come back in on this outside corner, and that's picked it back up. So that feels pretty reasonable. If we can get most of it right before we start welding it, it's going to be better. That's good through there. Good through that front piece. And I've got a little mismatch on the back, but I can do the same thing, 2 hammers. Tap it forward. So close. Now I don't want to step in there and put the weld in there and then grind the weld off and grind halfway through the pillar to get them flush. So just taking a little bit of time to get this to where I want it. Okay. I'm going to weld from about halfway across all the way to the back here. That's all lined up nice now. Now there is a little bit of a gap there. It's not too much to weld. That'll let the weld flow all the way through into the pillar. But what you do run the risk of is where there's a gap, once the weld shrinks it'll pull it down. But because this portion of the car is solidly welded together and this portion of the car is solidly welded together and it's got all this pillar material behind it, as the metal is cooling down it's going to stretch the weld, not stretch the car out of shape. Welding wise, I've pushed that as far as I could. There was a couple of times where it actually melted away from me. I've just plugged them up as I was going, and that means I have got the temperature of my weld as hot as I can possibly get it and still get a good weld on the pillar. So we know that even without looking inside the pillar, there's full penetration there because I've gone as hard as I can on it. So we'll let that cool a little bit and then we'll just check our alignment around it and then we should be able to do a bit more of it. Once again, don't rush yourself when you're welding, just take your time, get it all set up right, make sure your weld is set right, make sure you don't get it too hot by doing intervals between your welds, and you'll get good results every time. So this bit's nearly done, guys. We'll get this piece across the top in here and we've got the front part of the car all done. It's actually good, isn't it? Now even though this is really hot, I can run my finger across it and pick up any little mismatch. It would certainly burn my hand if I held it there. But I can just pick that up. But I will let it cool a bit more. The other benefit is hot metal is soft metal, so if there's still a little bit of a step in there, this is quite thick material, I can actually work it a bit easier than what it would be if it was cold. I'll let that cool down again now. I've done what have I got there? About 7/8 of an inch, so about 22 millimetres of weld. And if I go much more than that, I run the risk of blowing holes with it being hotter again. And because there's a gap, you still run the risk of that. So what I'm doing is having my welding angle quite flat to the metal, and that's giving me good penetration because of the electrical contact to either piece of metal as the weld's going in there. But I'm also bringing it back and I'm laying my weld on my weld. So I can put quite a bit of heat back onto that bead of weld, and that works quite nicely. But I'm coming around the corner there and I've got probably close to 2 millimetre gap there that I'm just going to weld up. So I'll just let it cool a bit and then I'll be zap, zap, zap as I go around that corner, fill in that little bit of a gap, and we should be good to go, just about finish it up. I've just noticed a little issue, and it was just the angle that this was running away on. So I've just noticed it's dropping a little bit, and because it's welded together it's pretty solid, but I'll give it a good clout with the hammer and I should be able to lift it up to match our original roof line. But it's not by much, we'll probably live with it, but if we can get it right, we might as well have it right. Bricky's bolster is one of the best panel beating tools ever made. It's surprising how often it'll get you out of trouble. You can work into corners with it, you can bring up style lines on the sides of cars with it where they've had accident damage, and when you've got roof builders that are out of place, you can hit them with it as well. Well, that's a problem we didn't need. Well, that's not going to affect my weld, so I'll keep going on the weld for now, but I do have to come up, and it's about 1/4 of an inch, 6 mil. So I'll probably put a block of wood and a jack in there. Hitting it's not actually making that much difference to it. With the roof pulled down tight on the other side, and I'm sitting with where I cut it off here, I've just got this bit of a gap in here I've got to lift. So now, if I'd picked up that I was out of step on this before I'd welded this here, these two pieces of metal would have slid on each other. There'd be no dramas at all. So we may have to undo some of these welds to get it to work, but I'm fairly confident that if we put a jack behind it with a block of wood in there, it'll be enough to just twist it where we want it. It's moved, but a bit of wood's just dropped out of where I want it. So just get another little bite on it. We are so close. Pretty lucky having the seat support exactly where it is. If that wasn't there, I'd put a big piece of wood across the floor to support the jack so that it wouldn't bend the floor. Let's not fix one problem and create another one. I'm thinking that for what we want to do, I'm going to split these welds again just to allow the two bits of metal to move. I'm not really happy with where it's wound up. It's just one of the joys of playing with old cars and the things you can get. So I get caught from time to time, and it's just a matter of working out how we go forward from here. But if I'd thought to check that before I welded the bottom plate to the top plate, we wouldn't have had this issue. But I can get the pillar finished, it's not going to affect that, it just needs to bend a little bit further up from it. And once again, salvaging pieces from a damaged car, you don't know what damage they've already had from it or from a previous accident or anything like that. So we'll get our bit of weld sorted out, and then we're going to have a bit of time unpicking our welds. Not fun, but going to have to do it. I've got quite a lot of weld in there, and this is the structural integrity of the car. We can't afford to take chances. So I've made sure that I've got plenty of penetration to get into that pillar to make sure it's solid. And even though I've got a bit extra grinding to do, I don't mind doing that. It just means that the car is going to be safe when it's done. Just a couple little spots to touch up, and that's that weld done. I've got an idea. I'm going to have a little play in here and see what I can do. I'm going to weld a couple of handles onto this piece here that's bent down a little bit. So in effect what's happened is this part of the car was dropped a bit from when it was taken apart. I've welded the new piece in there, but because there's a series of welds top and bottom and we've made a box section, it won't move back up easily. So if I weld 2 bits of metal on it, so I'll put one in here so it supports this edge here, and one in here, spot it to that there, spot it to that there, get a bit of weld on there, and it'll give me some leverage out here, and then I'll heat this area in here, and I should be able to just lift it up a little bit, because we don't need much, like we're only talking little tiny amount, so once it twists, it'll all work. Now, if I was really in trouble with this, I can undo these welds, and I can slide the 2 pieces of metal on each other. I can also cheat, and there's no problem with that as well. I could put a split in here, just inside this weld line. I could put a split in there. I could twist them together. They would move then, and I can weld them back together. That's all perfectly acceptable too. So it's just one of those little things that if you're not paying attention all the time, you'll get caught with some of this stuff, and we have today. And but the thing is to have a good think about it and just come up with the easiest solution to get it right. You can look again. Okay, that's bent it without actually heating it. So we'll just see if we can get a measurement to the floor either side, and hopefully that'll give us an idea of where we're at with it. This model was built left and right hand drive, so the floor pressings are the mirror image either side on the car, and everything else is the mirror image on the either side of the car. So we know that when we measure 41 inches here off this piece of floor, the other side should have the same measurement. And look at that, we now have 41 and a 16th. So we are a 16th of an inch high. That'll spring. Problem solved. Not going to worry too much about getting all these welds finished for now. because we can go on and get this piece in the top there and that'll work for this video. But I've just taken the sharp edges off from where I had those two pieces of tubing welded on there, just so I don't accidentally cut myself when I'm sort of working around the area. So this is within a 1/16 of an inch of where we need to be. We can bring that down with a hammer and a block of wood easily enough, but we'll get this rail clamped in place that goes across the top, and then we'll just check everything and we can weld that in place. Okay, that's got it where we want it, so bits of zap each side and we'll start putting it all together. Now I'm just going to spot both sides, and then that'll stabilise it, and I can drop the roof on there and just see how it all looks. That looks good enough to me. That's sitting in here on the edge of where we've put our new support in, and that corner's lining up pretty well. Just check the other side. And that side lines up here as well. Now it's pretty normal for this to be out of whack in the middle here like this. It has been separated out, it's come from another car, but the rigidity of the roof will allow me to just clamp this together in the middle, line that up so we get the angle of the windscreen opening right top to bottom, and then I can weld all that across there when we're ready to do that. That's a pretty good effort for today. We've got this bit of nitpicking done down this side of the car, we've filled in the rust pits, we've welded this corner in there. We had a little bit of a setback, but we just ran with it, got it sorted out, problem solved, and we're moving on. And that just goes to show that any one of us can have a setback or a stuff up along the way, but it's not the end of the world. It's just a matter of sitting back, and if the first idea to correct it doesn't work, try something else. And in this case, we tried 3 things. So originally I gave it a pretty good clout with the hammer, and that wasn't doing anything. And that's because cars will bounce a bit. So the impact that I was putting into it, the car was absorbing that impact, and the natural springiness of the metal was actually just bringing it back to the point where it was before. So then we put the jack and the piece of wood underneath it, and that brought it up. But once again, it wasn't doing exactly what I wanted, and it was starting to bend this front edge along here, and I could see if I pushed it any further I'd have problems. So I was all ready for heating it, and then I thought, well, why not weld some handles on it, and we'll give that a tweak first. So that's what's wound up happening. So 3 attempts, the third one worked a treat, and we got it to where we wanted it, and we brought it a 1/16 of an inch over. And quite often with metal, you'll bend it a bit too far and you check it an hour or so later and it's dropped back. But now that we've got this panel tacked between them, this roof structure has become solid again. So this side rail is tied to that side of the car, nothing can move. And when the skin was on, it was a little bit low here, but this is a flexible part of the car. We can bend that to suit the roof. And once again, we chiselled it apart. So there's going to be some sort of damage that we've got to repair as we go back together. But that's all good. It can happen to anyone, including me, and does regularly. So if you guys are doing something at home and you've sort of suddenly realised that something's not going right, just stop, sit back, have a think about it, and try a few things, and I'm sure you'll get it sorted. So while you guys are gone, I'll get in and finish welding this together, and I'll get all this ground up and cleaned up, ready to go. And I've got 3 or 4 little nitpicky spots on the other side. I can get them cleaned up, and when we get back together, we'll get into this piece on the back of the roof here and get that tidied up. So that'll be a bit exciting. We'll be cutting that open. It's a mystery what's inside there. I haven't seen in there, so we'll all find that out together. And we'll make a new piece and glue that on there, and that will leave the structure part of our job done. And then we're ready to look at our roof panel and start cleaning that up, look at whatever rust we've got to repair in that, and putting it back on the car. Until next time, thanks guys, we'll catch you then.